Good day to everyone joining us and welcome to today's X-Talks webinar. Today's talk is entitled, Dealing with the Current Delays in EU Medical Device Regulation, Town Hall Session. My name is Sonia Hunt and it's my pleasure to be your X-Talks moderator for today. Today's webinar will run for approximately 60 minutes. This presentation includes a Q&A session with our speakers. This webinar is designed to be interactive and webinars work best when you're involved. So please feel free to submit questions and comments for our speakers throughout the presentation using the questions chat box, and we'll try to attend to your questions during the Q&A session. Now, this chat box is located in the control panel, and that's found on the right-hand side of your screen. If you require assistance, please contact me at any time by sending me a message using that chat panel. At this time, all participants are in listen-only mode. Please note that this event will be recorded and made available to you for future streaming on xtalks.com. At this point, I'd like to thank ReadTech, who developed the content for this presentation. ReadTech is the provider of best-in-class information-based solutions and services to meet the needs of the life sciences industry, government agencies, and the intellectual property market. Their customers are located throughout the world and include a wide range of medical device manufacturers and pharmaceutical companies, the U.S. government, numerous patent authorities, and IP-driven companies and law firms. The corporate culture is driven by a commitment to excellence, innovation, and a strong dedication to their customers, employees, and communities. ReadTech is a LexisNexis company. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce your speakers for today's event. And I'm going to introduce you to Gary Sainer, Senior Manager, Information Solutions, Life Sciences with ReadTech. Gary is a subject matter expert, SME, on medical device unique device identification, UDI, and other structured content reporting to regulatory agencies and commercial organizations. He serves as a co-chair of the industry's structured product labeling technical team and on the advisory board of the Medical Devices Group. And now I'm going to introduce you to John Lawrence, who is a Senior Manager, Regulatory Solutions with ReadTech. John directs electronic submission and regulatory requirement initiatives that impact both the medical device and pharmaceutical industries. He has advanced experience with electronic drug product labeling and listing requirements and global UDI submissions. He participated as an industry resource in the original FDA pilot in 2012 and is currently focused on the present-day requirements for EU, UDI, and South Korea and China. He represents ReadTech in membership with MedTech Europe. And now I'm going to pass over the controls to our first speaker, Gary. Gary, when you are ready, you may begin.
Well, thank you, Sonia, for the introductions and getting us started today. Well, we're delighted to have you in the audience join us for a discussion on the ever-changing implementation plan of the European Union MDR. We have some short introductory information to set the context of this town hall, but the majority of the time will be on the Q&A session. We do assume that you have a good working knowledge and are familiar with the European Union Medical Device Regulation, MDR, and the In Vitro Diagnostic Regulation, IVDR. This is not a beginner course explaining the scope of the European Union UDIMED database or the details of UDI. You can find some of that material on our website under the Knowledge Center. But we do expect to dive into some of the questions and the nuances of the timing. John and I will probably use lots of acronyms in the course of the session. There is a list of those acronyms in the appendix, and when you get the materials, you can quickly refer to those items for your further information. We do want this webinar, as Sonia had mentioned, to be interactive and educational. We do not intend it to be a sales promotional webinar, but we do want to weave in some of our experiences related to the topics to add clarity and to add some real life scenarios. So please send your questions. We'll attempt to address them during the Q&A. Wanted to let you know that we did receive a number of questions during the registration period, and we were able to prepare some material to answer those particular questions. So we'll kind of knock those out in the beginning. Keep in mind, we will be able to best answer the questions related to our core expertise, and that being the preparation, management, submission of your medical device product, and UDI information to regulators and commercial trading partners. Though we are familiar with related topics such as product identifiers, UDI labeling, regulatory policies, etc., we may defer any of those detailed questions on those topics to another venue. So with all that said, let's take a look at what we'll be walking through today as far as the topics. Set the stage there with the European Union overview of the regulations and a little bit about the updates and the delays, and weave in some of the read text. But as mentioned, we'll spend lots of time on Q&A today. First off, I wanted to do a quick level set of the discussion to make sure that you're in the right room and hearing the topics that you want to learn about. We'll be talking about the major regulatory reform in the European arena that took the 3 medical device directives and is now in the process of replacing them with 2 European Union regulations, those being binding, whereas the previous directives had varying implementations as you went from member state to member state. This is a sweeping change, and many of the items that you're very familiar with in the directive time frame are cleared off the table. There's a lot of new content that needs to be addressed, a lot of new rules and regulations and guidelines and processes and so on. There's a lot that we could talk about, but I'd like to call your attention to the item about halfway down that list, and that being all products need UDI identification and registration. We're going to dive into that a little bit deeper in the next slide in our discussion today that we have for you. A quick summary of the UDI requirements as found in the regulations. There's 4 major tenets of that set of requirements. One is that you add UDI to the label, and that's brand new, identifying that particular item, finding a place on the label and squeezing it in. But creating labels is not necessarily something new. You've been doing that for years. But the content, this is a new object and new presentation of the UDI, both human readable plain text and also in something referred to as automatic ID data capture, typically as a 1-dimensional or a 2-dimensional barcode. Subset of all those devices qualify as reusable devices, and the label may have been separated from the actual product, so there is a requirement to put a permanent mark on some of those devices. All devices in the scope here need to have a various set of attributes defined and reported to a dedicated database referred to as UDI. There's a lot of activity going on in this particular arena, and we'll get into some details momentarily. The 4th tenet of the UDI requirements is around the arena of reporting, and there's a number of reports where this UDI value shows up. The one that I'd just like to highlight here is the patient implant card, where now those patients that have implants are able to have the UDI identifying their particular device, perhaps down to even the serial number, to identify that as they use that particular product throughout their lifespan. All right, so that's a quick set of background of what we'll be talking today. Sonia, I'd like to have you run a poll question at this point and see how the audience is doing in this particular process of preparing for UDI data submission. We talked about that there is this requirement to submit data, and lots of data, 100 or so fields to this database. Let's do a quick poll to see where they are in that process.
Okay, Gary, that sounds great, and I will do so. I'm now going to launch the poll question, and our audience members should see it right now appear on their screen, and there it is. I will give you about 40 seconds to complete this poll. Please select just one of the answers. This is done in real time, so your participation is greatly appreciated, as I will be able to share the results with you as soon as I close the polls. So all you have to do is simply click on one of the answers below, and the question is, which best describes your preparation for EU UDI data submission to UDI-MED? And you have a couple of options below. First one is not started, need help. Planning started with only internal resources, planning started with third-party help, or have progress collecting EU UDI data. So it looks like we have half of our audience members have casted their vote, so I do appreciate that. If I can get the rest of the audience to participate, that would be greatly appreciated. So I'll give you 10 more seconds to complete this poll question, and I will close the polls and share the results. Okay, thank you very much. Looks like we got the majority of everyone voting, so thank you for that. I am now going to close the polls and share the results. Okay, and here are the results of that poll question. So we have 17% that said not started, 4% need help, 41% planning started with only internal resources, and we have 18% at planning started with third-party help, and 19% at have progress collecting EU UDI data. Thank you, everyone, for that. I'm now going to pass over the controls to Gary. Gary, you may continue.
All right, thank you, Sonia. Looks like we still have some work to do, but glad to see that there's some good progress. This particular slide talks about the data submission. So once you have that data collected, there are various methods to transfer that data to a health authority. In today's conversation, obviously, that would be the European Commission's UDI-MED database. They do have a web interface that's part of some early prototype testing, and you would be able to make manual entry of your values, all those 100+ attributes for each device record into that web interface and basically type it in. Unique to the UDI-MED web interface is that you do also have the option of uploading an XML file. So the preparation of that is rather rigorous, and once you do create that XML file, you can do an upload. But I would imagine the other three options would be much more common, where you might have some internal skill sets and resources, and you're able to build this interface of transferring data electronically to UDI-MED. So over the data exchange definition and specs that the health authority has, that is one option to go about building a internal system on your own. The third option down there is actually you would buy some software that has that capability, and now it becomes a install in your on your premises, and you would use that particular piece of software to transfer data again to the UDI-MED. The fourth and last option is basically a rent option, where you're using resources that are outside your firewall, outside your system, but you have a tight electronic connection to a hosted piece of software, typically referred to as software as a service. You then are able to have that data uploaded, and that software takes that system, that data set, and builds the appropriate messages in XML and transfers it off to the UDI-MED system. We here at RETAC are actually implementing the last rung of this option, the fourth option there, where we do have a software as a service model, and we'll be talking more with John about the state of that and some of the testing that we've done. But before we go on, I'd like to take an opportunity to run the second of 4 polls that we have, Sonia. Let's run this next poll and have our audience give us some information about what particular submission method they were planning to use to submit UDI data to the database.
Certainly, Gary, I'm going to launch that poll question right now. And there it is. You should see it in front of your screen. Just remember to click on any of the answers below. This is done in real time like we did before. And the question is, which best describes the submission method you are planning for EU UDI submission? And please select one of the below. Not decided. Use UDI web interface, build internal submission interface, install third-party submission interface, engage SaaS provider with submission interface. So please go ahead and cast your votes. It looks like we have half of our audience has completed that, so I thank you very much for that. If I can get the remainder to go ahead and do so, I will give you another 10 seconds to complete this poll question, and then I will share the results. So once again, the question is, which best describes the submission method you are planning for EU UDI submissions? Okay, well, thank you everyone for casting your vote. I am now going to close the polls and share the results. And here are the results from that poll question. I have here 40% not decided. I have 26% use UDI web interface. 13% at build internal submission interface, 7% at install third-party submission interface, and 14% at engage SaaS provider with submission interface. So thank you everyone for participating in that. I'm now going to pass it back to Gary. Gary?
All right, thank you, Sonia. Let's move on to the next topic here, where we'll move into the timing of the regulations. So we kind of described what needed to be done and the task at hand. This is a slide that goes back a number of years, and since then there have been some delays. So unfortunately, we have to put a big obsolete over top of this timeline. Things have changed. So we'll try to cover those changes in the next couple slides here. One of the things that we learned early on was that there were some slow development progress in creating the various modules inside UDI. And at one point in time, the actual ownership was transferred from an internal group to another internal group. Both of those factors came into the play, and we saw this notice, and I'm sure you did as well, back in October of last year, where basically the European Commission came out and said, we're going to delay the launch of UDI for 2 years. So instead of being on March 2020, it's now pushed out to be May of 2022. That was a big change. Everybody tried to figure out what that meant, a lot of impacts. But don't stop there. There's more changes to come. The turn of the year, we all became involved in fighting this pandemic, COVID-19, and that really changed a lot of the way we work, in some cases productivity, and it certainly changed the attention of the European Commission. So the medical individuals inside the European Commission were certainly tasked to do a lot more things than they had normally been doing, requiring a lot of resources, and that drove the European Commission to postpone the date of application of the MDR. So that was pushed back 1 year. So the original date being May 26, 2020, now pushed back to May 2021. And yet there's more. So the other item that we became aware of is that there was a particular module, the actor module, and that is a very crucial module because it does have the intent of supporting the single registration number assignment and having the member states work through that interface to verify the request and addressing and generating a SRN number, which is necessary for a lot of the documentation in the MDR arena. They were hoping to release the actor module in May of 2020, so this would be very early. And yet, as time marched on, it became apparent this was not going to happen. They wanted all the various modules to be released simultaneously, and knew that there was a lot of interaction between those modules. So basically pushed the official launch of UDI-Med out to May 21. Well, the launch being in 2022, but one of the early modules, the actor module, being in March 2021. In addition to that time frame, the device and UDI registration modules, certificates, and notified bodies would be released earlier, again, roughly a year before the actual full launch of UDI-Med in May 2021, shortly after the actor module. So this is pretty exciting news. And John, maybe I'll just tap in with you for a second. What's some of the impacts as far as our interpretation of this? Do we think it's going to be a required submission at this point in time, or is it perhaps a voluntary type of submission, and is it maybe just a test module?
Sure. Thanks, Gary. First, it's a good job summarizing this. There's been a lot of changes over the years, so I know there's a lot to cover there. So with respect to our perspective right now, working through the MedTech Europe teams, and as you know, we're part of the testing team as well with testing out the UDI-Med Playground. Our understanding of the original release of the actor registration module of May 2020, which you just covered as being now delayed to March 2021, that was going to be a production release for voluntary usage. So when we look at the context of the trickle effect of this delay of that module going to March 2021, we expect the same, as that will be a production release available for voluntary usage, so organizations could get a head start of getting those SRNs. So since the messaging was provided by the Commission in the same context for the early release of device UDI registration, certificates, and notified bodies, our working assumption is that's under the same approach of a production release for voluntary usage. However, we do have, all this information just started coming out. It was last week or so, and we do have some meetings scheduled in the beginning of June with the MedTech Europe teams, where we're getting together, putting some, obviously collecting some questions and so forth for the Commission. And it is a piece we do want to receive some confirmation on, because as of right now, the only test environment is this playground environment, in which some manufacturers through MedTech Europe and some other organizations have access to either the user interface to do some manual data entry testing, or in the regard of an organization like ReTech, we have machine-to-machine access to build out and test our connection. But there's no general test environment available where you would say any manufacturer could get their hands on, similar to how the FDA has the pre-production good idea count. So that's still a little bit of a missing piece of this puzzle that we're looking to get some clarification on. Are they going to jump right from the playground environment to a production environment that's for voluntary usage? Or are they going to introduce an additional test environment? If not, are they going to open the playground environment to more participants prior to May? So, we don't have any firm answers and direction right now, but just wanted to share the thinking and some of the questions that we do have, in which we're organizing and getting together for hopefully have those questions answered, addressed by the Commission.
Very good, very good. So a little bit of wait and see. Meanwhile, keep moving on. Okay, so let's take a look at the various delays that we covered, kind of summarize them graphically. I always find that sometimes sinks in a little bit better. Where this was the original timing for the UDI-Med launch and date of application, But as we mentioned, there was this direction where the date of application would be delayed 1 full year. And in similar fashion as we discussed earlier, for resource reasons, the UDI-Med launch was moved out 2 years. So we have this type of arrangement with the timing of the MDR and the UDI-Med launch. There's been no changes on the IVDR date of application. So that still stands at 2022. And with these deadlines in place, this would have an 18-month required registration period for both legacy and MDR, and as well as IVDR device registration, running from May 2022 to November 2023. So that 18-month period is what you ought to target in as far as your device registration goes. And then what we just learned recently, these 2 early modules from UDI-Med would be available. Probably the early voluntary production modules, but we'll wait and see, where the active module would be available in March, and then the other 3, the device and UDI registration certificates and notified bodies modules, all come out in May 2021. So that's the timeline that we have in front of us right now. If those modules were to be available, and they would be either voluntary or like a voluntary test or voluntary pre-production, would like to get a poll quickly where we generate some information about whether the actual manufacturers in the audience would actually submit and make use of that early system. So Sonia, let's run this 3rd of the 4th polls here at this point.
Okay, will do. I'm going to launch the poll question now, and everyone should see it in front of their screens. And there it is. And the question is, would you submit device UDI registration data to UDI-Med in May 2021 if a system was available? Now, this is a multiple choice, so you can select all that apply. So your first options here are yes to a voluntary test system, yes to a voluntary production system, no, wait for official full UDI-Med launch in 2022, and the last one is not applicable. So please go ahead and cast your votes. As we did before, this is done in real time, so I'll be able to share the results with you. And I will close the polls in about 10 seconds. Looks like we have the majority of our audience members have participated, so I thank you for that. And for those who have not, can you please go ahead and do so now? 5 more seconds left, and I will be closing the polls. Okay, so thank you, everyone. I'm now going to close the polls and share the results. Okay, 5 more seconds. I had someone here saying not yet. They're still picking. Okay, go right ahead. Okay, I'm now going to close the polls and share the results. And here are the results for the 3rd poll question. Would you submit device UDI registration data to UDI-Med in May 2021 if a system was available? And this is what our audience members had to say. We have 55% said yes to a voluntary test system, 43% at yes to a voluntary production system, and 31% at no, wait for official full UDI-Med launch in 2022, and 8% at not applicable. So thank you everyone for participating, and now I'll send it back to you, Gary.
All right, thank you, Sonia. Very interesting stats there. All right, so let's now just do a quick summary of some of these delays, and then we'll get into some of the questions that have been submitted. As far as the UDI-Med delay takeaways, one of the things that you want to make sure you understand is that the MDR technical documents are all postponed because they are timed according to the date of application. So the hard work that you've been doing on getting the certification together for your Class 1 and other products, it's not lost, but now it's just, postponed a little bit. Gives you a little bit more time to finish that up. You were probably under a rush anyway in getting all that work done. It's huge. The reporting of serious incidences and device registration is not canceled in these interim period of times, but they're to be conducted under the corresponding previous directive procedures. So everything that you had been doing prior to this MDR activity still is in effect. So it's not like you don't report a serious incident anymore. You just follow the procedures that were in play beforehand, and they are now extended during these delays. The UDI development and testing continues, and John had alluded to that earlier, some of the activities that we had been involved with in doing the testing. John, did you want to quickly add anything to that discussion about how things are going, the number of records that we submitted, anything?
Sure. So essentially, just want to highlight that a lot of work has been done. So obviously we have that playground environment available. We know that from working experience. RETEC as an AS4 access point connected to that environment. Quite a few of the submission scenarios for UDI and basic UDI are supported in that playground right now. So we've gone through ourselves over 2,700 submissions sent through that playground. And there are a few gaps in some of the test cases that the commission provides us with that, perhaps there's some issues or some unexpected outcomes of the submission, and there's still some gaps in functionality. For example, legacy devices. So devices that will still, be under MDD at the time of UDI-Med, the ability to support that information. So that really hasn't been, or that's under development, hasn't been pushed out to us yet to be able to test. However, as these delays were being announced over the last month or so, the commission did indicate they're still working. They're about to update a functional specification, and they're still working towards the next round of testing for the testers. So we don't have a date as of yet as to when that next round will begin, but that's something we hope to understand very shortly. So there's still absolutely a lot of work that has been done that they're going to continue building upon, and we're expecting some new functionality to be delivered shortly. I think the commission, they even updated on their own website with that information, Gary, about the March of 2021 for actor registration, and they say possibly May 2021 for UDI certificates and notified bodies. That's a very positive indication that there's a little bit more work to be done, but they're gearing up to be able to have those modules go live.
Yeah, that's good to report that it's occurring in the background. I know that there's not a large number of users that have access at this point, and oh my, it was like 6 months or so ago, I was in a room with a number of other individuals, and the question was posed, has anyone ever seen UDI-Med interface? Does it really exist? Mm-hmm. And well, I was the only one that could say, yeah, well, we do know that it does exist, but for the most part, it's been kind of a black project running in the background. So anyway, that's good information. The fourth bullet here is highly recommended that you use your time wisely to prepare your documents, get those systems together, and start collecting and cleansing the data. You have some time to do this, and it'll evaporate very quickly. When this regulation first came out, there was 3 years of preparation, and guess what? Those 3 years have expired, and how much progress have you made? So we're down to the final few months here. So anyway, the recommendation is start working on that target design and environment that you need. Before we close out, there's just one pending issue that we want to make you aware of. MedTech Europe has requested a postponement of the IVDR, so those in vitro diagnostics manufacturers in the audience, heads up. That's simply a request. There's nothing official. European Commission has not responded officially yet to that. So for now, it's still date of application is still 2022 for that. Well, we'll wait and see. So that more or less, well, that does conclude some of the background information and a quick update of all delays and what's the impact and that sort of thing. We had the opportunity to collect a number of questions before this presentation, and a group of them, about 6 of them actually, came in, and they're all related to basic UDI-DI. So we prepared 3 or 4 slides in this next set to address those questions that appear to be very common. And for us to get a flavor of some of the questions, Sonia, would you be able to just read out those questions, maybe number 1, number 2, and number 4, 1, 2, and 4, to give us an idea of what the audience was asking about?
Okay, certainly not a problem. So this is the first question that came in. Number 1, what is the significance of the basic UDI-DI identifier, and what are the various uses of basic UDI-DI? The second question is, what are the grouping requirements for the basic UDI-DI, risk class, intended use, etc.? And the last one, number 4, I have here is, how can you currently obtain an EU UDI for a legacy device CE marked under MDDD without UDIMED being available?
So lots of good questions there, and that's representative of a host of questions, actually. All right, so let's take a look at basic UDI, and we'll find that this is a grouping identifier, and graphically you'll see a particular identifier at a high level, at a group family level, as referred to as a model, and then under that you might have the actual device. And this illustration, I make a pair of plastic forceps, and I have a device identifier as a child inside that family. And as you know, many of these devices have a hierarchy connected with them. I might have 3 forceps in a pouch, and I might have 2 of those pouches in a box, and so on. But noteworthy is that I might also make another group of forceps. Now they're stainless steel, and it is significant enough in a different model, and I have a different identifier for that, a different UDI-DI. Both of those forceps, the plastic and the stainless steel, I place inside my forceps family. And this can grow up to hundreds or thousands if you want, but you do have some parameters about what you put in the group. It can have as little as 1 device or many. I won't go over all the details here, but you can refer back to this. The guidelines for grouping are along the quoted text there in the first paragraph. Same intended purpose, risk class, and essential design and manufacturing characteristics. There are some format instructions given by the medical device coordination group. Maximum 25 characters and so on, has to have a check digit. This is always in addition to the UDI-DI, and the basic UDI does not appear in any physical labeling, and it's really just an identifier for grouping, filtering, and identifying a category or a group, if you will, of devices. The various standard organizations, GS1 and HIBIC and some of the others, all have their own implementation out. GS1 refers to their implementation as the global model number, and it does have some particular details in it. And for comparison, I put the various 2-level rows in here illustrating the global model number in the upper level and an actual G10, which we're all familiar with on the lower level, you'll see the differences. There's no indicator digit in the global model number. The company prefix is reused, and then there's a model number which does allow alpha numeric entries and a 2-check character entry at the right, and no barcode, because remember, this does not get printed on actual packaging, so it's not implemented on your actual product. There is similar rules in the HIPAA standard and in the other standards. One of the questions had to do with where is this basic UDI used? And you'll first come across requirements for this in some of the conformity assessment documentation you put together. The manufacturer's declaration of conformity, technical documentation, and so on. And it obviously is one of the fields that is reported to UDI-Med, and there's a number of fields, about 36, 37 type of attributes just for a device, basic UDI-DI. And then in the event you have some export products, the basic UDI also shows up there. One of the characteristics of grouping your devices is around the fact that all the fields that are assigned and attributed to the group, the family, and they're listed here in front of us. There's about 37 or so these particular fields. All these attributes must be the same for every member in the family. So if you have 1,000 devices in the same basic UDI, all those 1,000 devices would need to have these very same common attributes. Now, at the individual device level, they can have other attributes and with different variations, but these particular items are a common set. So when you start to think about the boundary and the scope of your BUDI, make sure that these particular common attributes are in existence for each one of your individual devices. As for references, there's a number of documents. I'd also, if you're using GS1, I suggest that you go to the general spec. It has a pretty good write-up about this particular topic. There's links here to the other issuing agencies, ICC-DBA and IFA and HIPAA and so on. One of the questions had to do with how do I create a identifier for my legacy products, a UDI for my legacy products? Well, the quick short answer is that legacy products do not need to exhibit a UDI on their actual product label. So you don't have to go to the task of creating a UDI and print it on the product label. Now, you might already have an identifier, and that's certainly fine, where the identifier happens to be a conforming UDI-DI on your product. That's certainly okay for that legacy product. But there may be a number of those in the audience that don't have such an identifier. And when it comes time to report your legacy device in that 18-month window that we talked about earlier, there are some rules about deriving an identifier so that your particular device record can be found inside the UDI-Med database. And it's that purpose where this, in that use, where that particular identifier would be used. So in the center of the screen, you'll see a B followed by the single registration or the single reference number, an ID and a check digit. When you concatenate those items together, you end up with a full UDI-DI entry when it comes time to register your legacy device into UDI-Med. The device, the child inside that family, has the very same set of characters except for the beginning character. In this case, you replace the B with a D, and you now have an identifier for the individual device. So that was a quick overview of basic UDI-DI and some discussion about legacy products. Let's move on to one of the other questions. This was, again, one that came in. Sonia, can you read out question number 7 that came in?
Certainly, Gary. Question number 7 is, I would like to know more on the UDI implementation in China, South Korea, and Saudi Arabia.
All right, so we'll use this question as the quick launch to go around the world and give an overview. This is past history. Hopefully this is all completed for the FDA. There is a wave of requirements for the National Health System of England, which is also passed. And then there is a South Korean deadline that I want actually, John, maybe you could talk a little bit about that. What's going on with South Korea? It was just at the end of last year. Hopefully those companies that have marketed the product in there did not miss that. What happened there?
Right, so South Korea launched their database, and as you have in the timeline, Class 4 devices were expected to be entered in last year. What's a little different with their implementation is the manner in which the data gets put into the database. They went live with 2 methods, one in which being a data entry directly within the system itself, and another an Excel template which would support initial bulk upload into the database. In that process, you actually need to retrieve the template from the South Korean database. It actually comes down pre-populated with some of the attribution populated, in which you append and re-upload into the system. Once that's complete, however, all maintenance of those attributes have to occur directly within the online editor within the user interface. Now, South Korea has been developing out API machine-to-machine capabilities to for the initial device registration, as additional classes will require to be entered for registration and maintenance going forward. Those specifications have been made available by South Korea. What we're looking to understand and in speaking with a lot of our manufacturer partners is when South Korea will support usage of those APIs to have a machine-to-machine connection for UDI registration. See, South Korea also has quite a large track and trace component in their overall implementation, so there is a lot of focus on that as well. And they actually have their first deadline coming up with Class 4 this year. So I feel like there's been a little bit of a focus shift in South Korea. So we're still waiting on seeing when we could use those APIs to connect. Right.
Very good. Well, I'm going to move on to the next slide, which kind of is current and forward-looking. This September, there's this deadline for the FDA Class 1. We do expect a huge volume. Don't get caught late. There were some delays in the last huge volume of up to a week or so, right near the September 24th deadline for Class 2. So keep that in mind. Make your submissions early. We do support that particular activity. The next wave, I think we pretty much talked about. There's some National Health Service and some European Union deadlines there. And we talked, thank you, John, about the update on South Korea. But the one I wanted to highlight came in the mix there is China. And maybe you can just give us a quick update on China. And the other one that came in as a question was, what's the update on Saudi Arabia?
Okay, so for China, they started a quote pilot for early entry of high-risk Class 3 implantable devices. And when I use the term pilot, I do want to differentiate how that's being used and what folks may be used to with perhaps the US and Europe, where there's actually only one system environment interface, if you will, for China. So a production environment. There's no separate testing system available or testing environment. So all of that piloting activity is occurring in the production database. And the methods in which that's being supported is, again, through data entry directly into the user interface. China provides an Excel template to populate and upload. But this time they also provided the API machine-to-machine method out of the gate. But the vast majority of the companies piloting have been using the direct data entry or Excel. Now, Reqm'ts in the process right now, we're expanding out our data model and machine-to-machine capabilities to leverage that API for China. So we're in the process of getting our token to connect to that, again, to the production database, but we're looking for a Reqm'ts connection, which we could use to develop and test against, but then ultimately would position us to submit to the China UDI database on behalf of other manufacturers when they receive their own API token to that database. So there is a lot of activity going on there. We're expecting, well, China's expecting, as of October, the pilot will transition to mandatory for the, again, the high risk class 3 implantables, then start seeing an implementation staggered in forthcoming years for other, the remainder of the class 3s and additional device classes. From a Saudi Arabia perspective, they've been building out their database. There was a pilot, a very small data entry only pilot that took place towards the end of last year. And it appeared that SFDA was really focusing just on data entry via online editor initially. However, they received a lot of feedback that they need to support some sort of bulk upload capability. But it appears that they weren't very keen on diving into a machine-to-machine, you know, your traditional, as we have with FDA, Europe, and what China is supporting. But they look to be open to entertaining an Excel spreadsheet upload. So we're not exactly clear as to if that additional capability is what's kind of been delaying, if you will, the launch of that database, because if you've been following this, it's almost like every month the Saudi UDI database is supposed to go live. But that, I believe it would have been supposed to be in January of this year, then it's February, March. I'm hearing the end of June as the latest. But still details TBD as to what will that support. Is that going to be data entry only, or are we also going to see an Excel spreadsheet upload capability, and also some clarity on what's their appetite for machine to machine. So I know there's a lot of industry stakeholders looking to engage them to, you know, for machine to machine, but we'll see how that shakes out. There's you know, again, it's another one we're keeping a close eye on. Even if it's spreadsheet, if it's more of a natural bulk upload and not so much like the South Korean process, it might be something we're looking to entertain supporting, even in lieu of having a more traditional machine-to-machine connection.
Very good. All right. Good overview around the world, and thank you for the updates and Reqm'ts points where we're making some development activity. Sonia, let's do our final poll question.
Yes, we'll do that, and it's a quick one, so I will launch it right now. Everyone should see it. This one here, please select all that apply. You can use more than one. In what countries do you market your medical devices? We have USA, EU, China, Saudi Arabia, South Korea. So please go ahead and select the ones that apply to you, and then I will close the polls and send it right back to Gary and John. Okay, thank you very much. It looks like we have the majority of everyone has voted. For those of you who have not done so, please do so right now. Cast your vote, as your participation is very much encouraged and appreciated. Okay, perfect. All right, so now I'm going to close the poll and share the results. Okay, and here are the results of that poll. We have in the USA 92%, EU 94%, China 59%, Saudi Arabia 53%, and South Korea 52%. Okay, so thank you everyone for participating with that. I'm going to send it back to Gary and John.
Okay, very good, Sonia. Real high participation around the world there. I think what we'll do then is finish off this remaining time with questions that have come in. Thank you for those that have come in. We'll eventually address those and have contacts with you. The various questions, you have any queued up there, Sonia, that we could take live? I know we took some time to go through the ones that were very common and came in during registration, but they occur very frequently. We actually bump into those questions pretty often. So I think it was necessary to go through that. Let's do some live ones in addition to what we had before.
Oh yeah, Gary and John, we've got about 5 questions lined up for you already that was taken in from the audience members and even more coming through. I don't know if we can get to all of them, but let's try to get through to these 5 that we have right here. So here's the first question from our audience members today. Which parties are considered actors and would utilize the actor UDI-DI registration module?
Well, let's see. I'm going to take the easy one, John. I'm going to say a manufacturer.
Okay.
Okay. An importer is also an actor and does need to sign up. There's distributors. And I believe there's the individuals called relabelers that also need to be part of the actors. Did I miss anyone in the list there?
So the term that's tossed around would be authorized representatives. Would be required to utilize the module to obtain the SRN. There's another term that may resonate. In the past, there may have been a term called economic operators. So if you fall into that particular umbrella, but for the most part, yes, Gary, we hear manufacturers, importers, and authorized reps need to enter that data in order to obtain their single registration numbers. So that's from a data entry standpoint. Other UDI actors could have access, perhaps like notified bodies and such, to receive the information that was entered.
Yeah, you know what was interesting to me, John, was the regulations had some tasks for each of these operators, and there was a lot of cross-checking. So an importer would have to check a manufacturer's entry to make sure it was complete and so on. And anyway, we won't go into the details there, but much more cross-checking than I would have expected. But let's take the next question.
Okay, here's the next question. Can a BUDI-DI be generated without the manufacturer SRN given UDI delays, and therefore the SRN cannot be generated in UDI at this time?
Well, you are able to generate, I'm sorry, was that to generate a BUDI or to generate a UDI-DI and ID?
You want me to repeat the question? I can do that, no problem. The question
is,
I'm
sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Can a BUDI-DI be generated without the manufacturer SRN given UDI delays, and therefore the SRN cannot be generated in UDI at this time?
Oh no, the BUDI is created by subscribing to an issuing agency, and there's a number of them: GS1, KBIC, ICC, BBA, and IFA. All of those standards do not use the SRN in creating the BUDI for a medical device. So you are able to do that right now, and you were able to do that for months, actually. So you will have to use typically the identifier given to your company. So let's just use GS1 as an example because it's so common. So there's a company prefix that goes into making up the BUDI, and then you go about putting an identifier in there. There's a check digit that needs to be generated, and GS1 has published the formula and the algorithms to create that BUDI, as well as the other standards companies, for a number of months now. So John, do you want to add something to that? But you are able to, summary, you are able to create a BUDI even now without using UDI.
Yep, yeah, it is. Confirm that. The only way you may get tripped up is if you're thinking about legacy devices. But yeah, you could go ahead and get started right now.
Yep.
Okay, all right, thank you very much, gentlemen. Here's the next question. For products that are to be discontinued and will not transition under EU MDR, but will be sold under MDD during the transition period, will they need a basic UDI-DI?
So if I understood that right, we're talking about a legacy product that is continued after the date of application, but then it is pulled off the market at the end of its CE certificate mark, or it hits the deadline of, I believe it's 2024, 2026, I forget off the top of my head there. But there is a deadline, so there's 3 additional years after the date of application for an MDR legacy product. There's no requirements for marking that product with UDI, but let's think about the European Commission's interest in recording information about that product that's out in the field, as far as maybe serious events or some things that happen. They want to have surveillance going on with all those field products. So inside UDI, that legacy product does need to be registered. And that is the scenario that we touched on a little bit earlier, where the pseudo identifiers, UDI-DI and UDI-ID, are actually generated at the time you register that legacy product. So that's actually starting a couple of years from now. John, I think you had mentioned that this testing has not actually been exercised yet in the sandbox, but expected to be so, tested at some point in time. But you don't have to mark your product with that legacy, with a UDI on that legacy product, but you will have to register that for ongoing life scan after the, or once the UDI opens up. Anything else?
Okay, we have more questions. I was checking to see if you had any more to add, because I know you like to talk.
Oh, yeah. Well, John, did you want to, did I miss something there? Or
No, I think you got it.
Yep, you're good.
You're good. Okay, here's the next question. Go. We have 2 more left. All right. When the UDI appears on the label, does the UDI symbol also need to appear?
Yeah, there's a presentation requirement for the UDI on the product label. And the label has to be in 2 objects, both something called human-readable text, so that's simply text characters, and also in a in the AIDC, which is typically a single dimension or a 2-dimensional barcode. So those 2 presentations need to be actually on the product themselves, text and a barcode, typically. It is able to use an RFID type of identifier as well, but you still need a barcode in that case anyway. Now, in addition to that, they may have been referring to a medical device symbol. So there is a new ISO symbol that would need to appear on your label, simply the letters MD in a rectangle. So that needs to appear on the label. Now, they may be referring to UDI in a rectangle, the 3 letters. I have not seen requirements for that, and would have to get back to you on that particular item. If that's what they were asking about, whether UDI had to be in a box and presented, I am not aware that that is a requirement at this point in time. Another one?
Yep, this is the last one that we have coming up. What are the specific data elements comprising the BUDI-DI? Is there a good source for the provisions of specific BUDI-DI information? EU MDR Article 25 and MDCG 2019-1 don't seem to provide this level of granularity.
Yeah, I would recommend. Oh, you went? Go ahead, John.
Yeah, let me see if I'm reading your mind, Gary. I was going to recommend on the EU Commission's UDI reference site. They host something that is called the UDI Data Dictionary. It's an Excel spreadsheet. I believe it's version 5 of that is what's published. Within that spreadsheet, they break out tabs of the data attributes for the UDI database, including the basic UDI attributes. To me, as working on the product team, building out our solution for everything, that's my definitive source. And that's probably a source that Gary was using on that slide earlier, where you did see that granularity provided. But that would be my go-to to see specifically what attributes are required there, so you could work through your devices in the manner in which Gary was suggesting, to give you an idea as to what could fit from at least a technical perspective to be under the same basic UDI.
Yeah, ditto. I was right there with you.
Right.
So that's it. Okay then. All right. Well, thank you very much for those questions, audience members. We have reached the end of the question and answer portion of this webinar. If we couldn't attend to your questions, the team at ReadTech may follow up with you after this presentation. If you have any further questions, please direct them to the email address that's on your screen, and that's meddevice@readtech.com, or call 1215-682-8279. Thank you everyone for participating in today's webinar. You will be receiving a follow-up email from X-Talks with access to the recorded archive for this event. A survey window will be popping up on your screen. Your participation is appreciated, as it will help us to improve on our further webinars. Now, I'm about to send you a link in your chat box. You'll be able to view this recording of this event at that link, and also share this link with your colleagues when they register for the recording as well. So I encourage you to do that. Now, please join us in thanking our speakers, Gary Sainer, Senior Manager, Information Solutions, Life Sciences, and John Lawrence, Senior Manager, Regulatory Solutions, both from ReadTech, for that very insightful presentation. So thank you. We hope you found this webinar informative. It has been my pleasure to be your webinar moderator. On behalf of the team here at X-Talks, we thank you for joining us. My name is Sonia Hunt. It has been my pleasure. Until next time, take care and bye for now.